What's up, good people? My name is AJ and you are watching Straight Talks. Topic of the video here today is a personal one to me, and I got this request in a comment on one of my prior videos. So if you have any topics that you'd like to see me talk about in a future video, feel free to go ahead and leave that in the comment section down below here. And that is my background and my education story. Now, I've already made videos about why I decided to take the CFA exam, why I decided to take the CFP exam, so I'm going to kind of go from about high school through college here and ignore the professional designations just to avoid redundancy. If you're enjoying any of the content, or if you're just new to the channel, I'll ask you to go ahead and please leave a like on this video down below here, and also subscribe to the channel. Both of those things help me out a little bit and I appreciate them. So let's get into this one. The overarching theme of my background and educational story is that I had my mind made up at a pretty young age what I wanted to do for a career. I don't think most people fall into that category. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad. Actually, maybe I pigeonholed myself too much, whereas if I hadn't had this preconceived notion of what I wanted to be doing, I could have expanded my horizons a little bit. I certainly am not going to encourage everyone to do it this way. I just want to mention it because I do feel pretty lucky in the sense that I didn't have to do any deliberation or stressful decision making on what I wanted to do throughout college or what I wanted to study before college, because my mind was already made up. You should know that before I go into some of this, just because it is going to make my story fairly one-dimensional. I knew what I wanted to do throughout this process. It might be far more interesting to listen to someone who had no idea what they wanted to do throughout high school, college, and then entered the workplace, because I think more people fall into that category, number one, but also because you're just going to hear more deliberation that went on in their head on how they decided on what they liked and what they didn't like. But for me, at a very young age, I wanted to be a school teacher, and then when I was 13, I was driving with my dad in the car. I remember the stretch of highway we were driving on one day, and I was kind of flipping through this magazine that he had sitting on the floor of his truck, and it said, financial advisors make $279,000 a year. I think that was the number that it listed. And I was like, hey, Dad, what's a financial advisor? And he kind of told me what it was, and it also listed in that article that they had one of the highest levels of job satisfaction. And again, I mentioned I wanted to be a teacher, so being a financial advisor combines teaching people about the financial markets, but also helping them take advantage of something that exists, which again is the financial markets, that will grow their wealth by the end of someone's career, in my opinion, at an unbelievable rate. And most people don't really think of it that way. So it's a super cool topic that I started to become interested in right then. And probably within a day I said, yep, never mind, I know what I want to be now, a financial advisor. And I really didn't know all that much about it at the time. But then going into high school, I started to learn more about stocks and mutual funds, and I invested in GE was the first stock I bought, General Electric. Glad I sold that relatively quickly, within a couple of years, I think, because that was probably in 2005. And then I also invested in a mutual fund. I think it was called the Hodges Fund, and I think the ticker was HDPIX or HDMIX. I don't know. Maybe I'll look it up after this. But anyway, I started to get interested in those types of things before I was even in high school. I went to a really small high school. I didn't have a lot of opportunity, didn't have any AP classes that I could take there, so I did a math and science program at another university where I could do some AP classes to hopefully get some college credit and also juice up the college application. But in my high school, I had two options. I think I could opt into sociology or economics or something like that. I definitely picked economics, and then I could also opt into some type of computer class or accounting, and I did accounting in high school too. And both of those classes maybe just cemented in my own head throughout high school that, hey, this is what I want to do. A lot of my high school career was built around creating the best application that I could for a specific college I wanted to go to that was very competitive in the finance field. And I was able to do that through the help of some family members, luckily. I mean, they didn't buy my way in, but I can't say I just did it all on my own. So I was privileged in that sense and put in a lot of work and was able to get accepted to college. And then right away, freshman year, I said, okay, I'm going to major in finance. I already knew what I wanted to do. Now here's where it gets a little more interesting, because throughout the first 3 years, I went away from just wanting to be a retail advisor or work in wealth management. And I said, I probably want to do something more like equity research, because I think in college it just sounded sexier. My college, like I said, was a pretty highly rated finance undergrad program. I had the opportunity to go through several different projects and experiences with businesses, big and small, that operated in those industries to try to get some real world exposure about what the equity research or, say, hedge fund industry looked like. As a side point here, I never wanted to do banking. I always felt like the people in banking were all jerks, and I didn't have the GPA to do it anyway, so I couldn't have done it if I wanted to. Maybe that played into this decision in my own mind subconsciously. But I am also of the position that I never want my job to dictate my life. I want my job to just provide an income for my life so I can decide to do with that what I want. So I didn't want a job that would tell me where I have to live, and I also didn't want a job that would require me to work more than like 50, especially 60 hours. And in the finance industry, you know, that rules out a ton of jobs. So maybe I sound like I'm being picky, and in a sense I was, but wealth management is just so much more flexible in that sense. I don't know that I knew that throughout the end of my junior year when I started to change my mind back to go to wealth management. But I'm kind of glad that I ended up in that industry or sector in the industry for that reason. But also, and to overlap a little bit with my why I took the CFA exams video, I really wanted to be a CFA charter holder throughout my junior year of college. And, you know, that job is pretty synonymous with like working at a mutual fund or doing equity research. So because of my interest in the CFA program also, it felt more natural that I would be working in those fields. The big change for me back to what I had originally wanted to do, the big change for me back to what I had originally wanted to do, working in wealth management or being a retail financial advisor, came once I started doing interviews for some of the positions in those other sectors in the industry that I ended up not liking. And it wasn't necessarily the content. I mean, it's all financial markets related. Of course, everything has some categorization of information that's different, and you're going to work with that information and data set differently and do different types of critical thinking. But in general, I don't think I determined, oh, hey, valuing stocks isn't that interesting to me. In part I did, I mean, because that's kind of true. I did decide that it was super boring to have to do that all day long. But that wasn't the determining factor in these interviews that I sat in. I think it was more just, it's hard to put my finger on it, but I think it was more just like the style or the environment of the industries that I was interviewing for. I didn't love. I'm just not really like a Wall Street style financier where, you know, you love putting on your suit and tie every day and analyzing the markets. I like some of those things, but just not all of it. So again, I can't put my finger exactly on it. But the interviews that I did with wealth management were sweet. I liked the people, I liked the job descriptions, I liked what it sounded like the work would include. And of course, it also gave me fond memories, I guess, of what I'd always wanted to do throughout high school and my, maybe you could say, first part of college semesters, where you know, I had planned on being a financial advisor. The only really sad part for me when I went through that realization that that's actually what I wanted to be doing with my career is that I was like, well, darn, now I can't do the CFA program. Of course, that reality changed, so you could check out my story in that video. So then after the first couple months of my senior year, I had basically solidified what sector of the finance industry I wanted to be working in, which was great because that's really when I started doing full-time job applications. Another side note here, since my school was a pretty top-rated finance undergrad program, they're super strict on you landing a job because all that matters for their rankings and data reporting. And so you have like all these meetings every week or every other week with your, I think it was called career advisor, to say, hey, what companies have you applied for? What interviews have you landed? How are the interviews going? And have you accepted a job offer yet? And honestly, the last semester of your senior year, you almost have no requirement to do the assignments. It's literally just like scheduling and doing as many interviews as you can. And that mentality really helped me out in getting the job that I did, because without that, I don't think I would have applied to as many jobs I did or considered the swath of opportunities that I had in front of me. Check out more of my story on that in my how to get an internship video. I talk about how I got my internships and then my full-time job. Even though I started interviewing or applying for jobs, I should say, or really not even just applying to jobs in some cases, emailing or calling partners of firms that I thought might be cool to work at, it took me like 6 months before I actually landed something. And that was a long and fairly stressful 6 months. 6 months that I was really just met with failures every day or at least every week for a long period of time and had to keep chugging through. I also pigeonholed myself a little bit more because after I knew the specific sector in the finance industry I wanted to work in, I also had 2 cities that I wanted to be working in, and I didn't want to have to move anywhere else other than those 2 cities. So of course that limits the availabilities that I could get. But there was still a huge number of firms operating in the subsector in those 2 cities. So even though there weren't formal applications out from all those companies, I just tried to make as many connections as I could. And that's really it, guys. I focused my educational career on getting the job that I wanted to pretty well. Like I said, I went back and forth there a little bit, but not to the extent that a lot of people do when they say, oh, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a lawyer, whatever. Those things are all very different. Mine was much more straightforward, and I feel lucky for that. By May of my senior year, actually by by April of my senior year, I had a 2 or 3, maybe 2.5, I would call it, job offers in the industry or sector that I wanted to be working in, and was really happy to land in the job that I was, or I'm still working today in a job that I enjoy a lot. So if you have any questions about my educational background, feel free, of course, leave them in the comments down below, and thanks for watching.